Whoa, shocking. Cool. With that, I'll cede back to the chair.
And I call this house adjourned.
And that's private business, all done and over with. I hope you guys learned a bit about the society, even if all you learned was that we really like weird formalities. Cool. Now I'd like to call upon the chair for our public business, Professor John Fitzgerald.
Right, thank you very much. I call this house to order and I call upon the record secretary to read the minutes of the last public business meeting.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about the culture of fear that we are living in. We are being subdued, bending to the will of government control. And the fake news mainstream media is peddling one-sided narratives to perpetuate this control on behalf of a corrupt industry that we all know is just looking to profit off of our fear. Well, I'm fed up. I'm not wearing them anymore. That's right, folks. I'm talking about oven mitts. How is a guy supposed to conform to the hard man aesthetic if he has to wear giant mittens while he's tearing it up in the kitchen? You don't see Gordon Ramsay prancing around in Hell's Kitchen, roaring and swearing at people till they collapse in tears while wearing bloody oven mitts. I mean, are they intimidating? Are they macho? Of course not. They make you look like an overgrown baby. And this baby must have been pumped full of roids because he's got some serious 5 o'clock shadow. But that is why I say enough is enough. And I know all of the real men here will agree with me. Down with oven mitts. And finally, folks, as you all know, we're now in stage 3 of lockdown. So please be sensible and wear your feckin' masks.
All right. And are there any objections to my signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? I'm not aware of any objections. Are any of you aware of objections? All right, then I shall duly sign in whatever form that takes. And I'd now like to call upon the auditor to introduce the invited guests to the house.
Thank you. This evening, we have 2 wonderful guests. In the chair this evening, we have Professor John Fitzgerald. Professor John Fitzgerald is the chair of the Climate Action Advisory Council. He is also an adjunct professor in economics at Trinity College Dublin and a research affiliate at the ESRI. He is currently a member of the Commission of the Central Bank of Ireland and of the independent expert panel established in 2014 by the Department of Communications, Energy and Natural Resources. He frequently writes for the Irish Times on economics, and we're delighted to have him here tonight. We also have speaking in opposition this evening, Tate Donnelly. Tate Donnelly is a student at Trinity College Dublin and a Dáil candidate for the Green Party in the 2020 general election. He was elected to the Green Party National Executive Committee and serves as the Secretary of the Cavan Monaghan Greens, as well as founding a Green branch in Trinity College. At 21, Tate was the youngest candidate in the 2020 general elections, and equally, we are delighted that he's here to speak in opposition. Just before we move ahead with the debate, I'll explain the standing orders for this evening. So debates will be 7 minutes in length for students and 10 minutes for guests, with the first and last minute protected. And it's protected from POIs or points of information. And points of information may be offered after the first minute and then stopped being offered once you get to the last minute. What are POIs or points of information? Basically, they're an opportunity for anyone, both in the audience, but also on the other side of the debate to ask a question of the speaker. It's a really good opportunity to engage in the debate, and we definitely recommend anyone in the audience to basically type into our Q&A function or else type into the chat a question that they have. We'll be sure that the speaker notices and whether or not they'll accept them, but still it's a great way to try and engage with the debate. The vote will be carried out on Zoom through the poll function. And also we'd like to draw your attention to oratory returns. So this year, oratory returns are this long-standing thing in the HIST whereby you basically judge and grade the speakers, how well you thought they spoke. And this is really important because at the end of the year, we give a prize to the best speaker in chamber debates. And so we really encourage you guys to fill out this form. This year, it's gonna be a Google form. Maggie, our core sec, just posted it into the chat. Please watch the debate and then fill it in. But yeah, please fill that in. It's really, really useful. And it means that someone can get a really good prize at the end of the year. So with that, I'll cede back to the chair.
All right. The question before the House this evening is this House would emigrate. And I should now like to call upon Laura Egan to propose the motion to the House. Laura.
Ooh. Trying to add some atmosphere with clapping.
So welcome everyone, especially to our new freshers. I am here to propose that this House would emigrate. And if I could change the spelling, I would, because I don't want to emifine. I don't want to emigrant. I want to emigrate. And here is why I think first reason that I think this would be emigrate. Oh, I need that page. Okay, so like I love Ireland. I love living in Ireland. It has phenomenal culture. Some of the loveliest people I've ever met. And I've had great experiences here. I've loved growing up here. And I'm not going to elaborate anymore on why Ireland's great and why I love Ireland, because I'm sure Op are going to do plenty of that this evening and I look forward to it. But I don't think any country can be best at all things. I think Ireland has shown that it is great at things like attracting multinational companies. I think it has shown it is not doing so great on housing and things like that at the moment. And look, I don't think any country is perfect. I don't think that I'm going to magically appear at some other country that ticks off every box on some imaginary checklist I have. But I think that there could be a country that suits each individual better. I think it's not necessarily that one country is better overall or that everyone would pick the same country to emigrate to. But I do think that different countries will suit people in different ways. I think it might be that the values align more with other countries, or it could be something simpler. Maybe you just don't like the way it rains all the time in Ireland. But I think even experiencing other countries can show you that there are different ways of living, perhaps ways you thought about, and maybe that's why you decided to emigrate. Or maybe things you haven't even considered, but then once you experience them, you think they're done so much better somewhere else. So I think you can't objectively decide which factors most could have depend on the individual, but I think regardless of the individual, it makes sense and great. Nobody can think I want to. So with that, I also think it's important to point out in this debate that it's not necessarily permanent. Because sometimes when people think of emigrate, they think they leave the country and they don't come back very often, or they don't come back at all and they move somewhere else and settle down. And yeah, that's one way of emigrating. And I do think if you're going to emigrate, it's going to be somewhat of a long-term thing. But I think it's important to remember that if you end up somewhere else thinking it's going to be a great move, and a couple of years down the line, you do change your mind where you enjoy the experience, but it's just not where you want to be at that time, you can still return. We saw a lot of this earlier in the year when a lot of people came home to Ireland after being abroad because they wanted to be home with all the uncertainty, and that's fine too. But I do think it is worth the experience of moving abroad and emigrating. And of course, there will be challenges. I know this. We all know this. A lot of things that are worth doing, though, have challenges. And I know I get lost very easily. If I went abroad, I would definitely end up lost pretty much every day for the first while. I'm not under any illusions about that. But at the risk of sounding like some sort of motivational poster, I do think challenges can give you space to grow, and they can be good for you as well, even if they're not particularly pleasant while you're going through them. I think looking back, you can learn a lot of lessons from it. And I think going abroad and emigrating can give you that chance, that space to learn new lessons that you wouldn't have learned by staying in Ireland. I also think some of the challenges have eased in recent years with technology and stuff like that. Things like missing home, missing your family, missing my cat, which I definitely would, aren't so hard when you have things. And as much as I never want to touch Zoom again after this year, options like that have become a lot better this year. Like communication is way more of an option than before. At this stage, we're all used to communicating on about 10 different platforms, and we know what works and what doesn't. And even if it's not our favorite idea in the world, it does make going abroad a little bit less scary and a little bit less final or permanent, which I think is important to remember. So that's most of my first point. Second point I want to make is that even if the other country isn't better than Ireland, or whatever country you happen to be emigrating from, even if it's worse and you don't like it as much, I think it's still worth emigrating, because I think even the experience in itself is valuable. You're probably not going to hate the country you pick to emigrate to in every way. You will probably still learn something. You will probably still make some friends and can still be a really good experience. I think also from living abroad and emigrating, you can appreciate the differences and nuances of the other country and the way they do things, their culture and things like that, in a way you wouldn't have experienced if you only lived in Ireland. I think it's not necessarily that the other country is better or anything like that, but that trying each country is better. That even if you end up coming back to Ireland 10 years down the line because you actually decide that you really want to come back for family reasons or anything like that, it's still worth having gone abroad. And basically what I'm saying is, even if the other country by itself is worse than your experience in Ireland, the combination is still better than just experiencing the one of those, because I think there's so much to be learned. Even when you go on holidays abroad and things like that, even if it's only a short one, you still pick up so much in those few days, and you still learn so much that things that you wouldn't even consider. It's not even that you go planning to learn these things, but the experiences, you don't even notice some things are different until you go abroad, and you notice things that you wouldn't have even thought could be done a different way. And I think some of that can be brought back if you ever do return, but even if not, some of the ways you do things can be brought. I do think you can make your own piece of home, and especially if you're talking about emigrating from Ireland, there's such a strong Irish community in so many places across the world. I think it was said in the description of the debate that like emigrating is almost part of the Irish experience because there's such a history of it, and I think that also helps. If you're moving abroad, even if you don't necessarily know people in the area, you can still get in touch with Irish culture, with parts of Ireland you love, and things like that. And I think that's really important to remember as well. We're so lucky in Ireland that way, that even when you move abroad, you're still sort of have your connections to home like that. And I think that's really important, that you can still get in contact with your culture while experiencing a different culture also. And I think that's such a combination. It's such a rich experience. I think it is something people should definitely consider. So yeah, that is most of my speech now. But what I really want to emphasize is, even if the other country is not perfect, even if it's still worse than where you are now in many respects, it can still be a really worthwhile experience, and it's definitely worth considering. So now that my speech and awful pun is over.
Thank you very much, Laura Egan. And I would like to call the first speaker for the opposition, Matthew Charlton.
Hi, can everyone hear what I'm saying? Yeah? Yeah, you can. Okay, sorry, I'm just asking because I couldn't understand any of Laura Egan's nonsense. I'm joking. I got it all, and I'm a bit embarrassed that I actually have to spend 7 minutes disagreeing with her. You know, I was actually asked to speak at the Lostock Students versus Professors comedy debate last Friday. That's all. I just wanted to let you know that I was asked to speak at the Lostock Students versus Professors comedy debate last Friday. I'm joking. I tell you this because I had my terrible and unfunny script in front of me on my screen instead of the Zoom window like I have now. And this caused two unforeseen problems. The first was that I had no idea what people thought of my jokes, and my terrible, awful jokes. So I was saying a lot of odd things in front of these professors, and they ended up being absolute stabs in the dark because I was getting absolutely no feedback, which was, to put it mildly, very disheartening. And the second was that I had a piece of broccoli in between my teeth the entire time, which I only learned of by my friend Owen afterwards, who told me that the broccoli gag, as he called it, was the best bit. That's actually true, yeah. Terrible, I know. So how does any of that relate to emigration, you may or may not be asking? Well, it relates simply because if this house emigrated, this house would not have known about or attended my excellent Lostock speech. There. No, in actuality, there's much more to be said for the case to not support this motion. The motion this house would emigrate is abstract. It relates to whether or not, on balance, in our current climate, would and should it be good for people to emigrate. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it might be safe to assume that the majority of speakers here are placing this debate in Ireland, as there may or may not be any reasonable debate to be had arguing whether or not it's preferable for people in less privileged nations to emigrate. So I'm going to give you 2 points to consider why this house would not emigrate out of Ireland: collective responsibility and national privilege. So on collective responsibility, imagine this. You're doing a group project for Introduction to Economic Policy A with 3 other people. You know, you decide to take leadership. It's the beginning of first year. You want to improve yourself. You want to prove to yourself, and you want to really throw yourself into the project. And then bam, Guess what happens? Type into the chat. Guess what happens? I'm here. I'm here. Guess what happens? Someone, anyone? Yes, Oliver got it. Yes, yes, Ollie. Your partner emigrates. They leave the country. Bam. Group project. Nope. Project. Whether we like it or not, the world as it stands right now is one essentially full of large group projects known as countries. And as members of this group project, Ireland, I think we can all agree that we would like this group project to be as excellent as my first year economic policy A project was. You know, I know the standard is high, but we can manifest it. Everyone in this debate and everyone watching this debate has so much to offer. Buckets of personality, buckets of intelligence, buckets of potential, and buckets of genital herpes. You know, in one framing, it does boil down to this question. Ask yourself, do you have anything to offer to this group project whatsoever? And when the answer is invariably yes, then I ask you, why not offer it? Why spend your talents somewhere else? And if some of you answer no, then your honesty is doubtlessly something that we have to offer to our group project. And, you know, the group project would love to know, do you actually like my hair like this? Because yesterday I was quite badly berated in the HIST group chat for it. And the day before that, I was quite rudely perhaps called Arlene Foster. So the point is, you do have something to offer this group project. Ireland, despite not being perfect, despite not being the idol we dream it to be, it won't get any better unless there are people who are working here to try and improve our broken systems. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael obviously have no more interest in improving the state of 10,000 homeless people in our nation than they do in golf. The Reception and Integration Agency are clearly not doing an excellent job at receiving and integrating asylum seekers when they run the human rights abusive direct provision system with the prison-like conditions. Our land of 1,000 welcomes is welcoming onto prospective citizens, and we obviously aren't going to reach any of our desirable sustainable energy goals anytime soon, further damaging our ecosystem and directly harming our children's children out of sheer laziness. And you know, you may think that these issues are beyond your capabilities in this group project, and that might be true. It might be true, but there's certainly a 0% chance that any of these issues could be in any way improved by you, by your emigration. And if you haven't yet been convinced by the lack of merit of emigrating, by which I mean if you have not been listening hard enough to my speech, then fret not, I have one last point. So that point is of national privilege. Without sounding too cringy, which Laura prophesied I would, talking about Ireland at the beginning of her speech, so well done. There are many, many things this nation has to offer that are so few and far between in other countries. Ireland even has exclusive offers. Like, you know, when you go onto the Top Man site for the 10th time in one day, and it tells you that suddenly those purple joggers are an exclusive offer. So name another country that has such a proud tradition of bilingual literature. Name another country that has such a proud tradition of third level educational attainment and success. Name another country where the national personality stereotype is happiness and friendliness. And I'm serious, by the way, I don't see any the chat lighting up with answers. Try this one. Name another country where every school child has the opportunity to learn the Irish language. Yeah, I don't think you can do that. Now, name another country with such astounding green surrounds and environments. You're probably able to do that. But yeah, so you're able to. But none of you will be able to name a country that has all of those things, which isn't this country. And regardless of whether or not you believe any of those things to be of value, nationhood in itself has an inherent value to it. It's a psychological phenomenon that, in its positive form, binds people together in sports stadiums or for charitable purposes, or even over a debating Zoom call in order to not break lockdown measures and keep people safe. And, you know, if you don't have national pride, then I would argue that it's probably more desirable to have this positive emotion than to not have it. And, you know, boy, do I know about negative emotions. Over lockdown, I actually developed quite a severe addiction to hating myself. I'm joking. I don't propose this motion. I oppose it, so I don't hate myself. Kundera acher lemuchuj kaincha. Fake erna noshun ella atá timple on Down. Where are you even going to emigrate to? The USA? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew Jarton. And now I would like to call Elias Wee to propose the motion.
Before Elliot moves forward with his speech, I have two announcements. The first being that there will be floor speeches for this debate. So if you're interested in having your say, feel free to message either myself or Maggie, probably Maggie, she's the boss, she knows what she's doing. If you want to give a floor speech, floor speeches will be 4 minutes in length, and they'll be happening after the end of everyone else's speeches. It's really good opportunity to get used to debating, especially over Zoom. We definitely encourage everyone to sign up. And then also my second announcement, which is a lot more fun, is basically, Elias, you are a maiden speaker, meaning you've never spoken before in chamber, or at least virtual chamber, as well as chamber normally. Usually there is a maiden's rights, which means that you can have no POIs asked during your speech. You can either accept your maiden's rights or rescind them, which means that you'll get thunderous applause produced by my computer. What's your say?
Oh, I'll rescind it, of course.
Woo!
Well, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. All right, my name is Elias. Good evening. I'm from Singapore, and back in Singapore, there's a government department tasked with attracting talented people and organizations to Singapore. I do not work for them, let me be clear, but I have a similar task today, and that is to try convince you to emigrate. Now, I'm not going to go about this by, disparaging one country over another. Instead, I'm just going to, address some of your potential misconceptions that you may have about Singapore and assuage your concerns. In true debating style, I'll be covering 3 main areas: geography, economics, and culture. So for those of you who don't know, Singapore is a teeny tiny island in Southeast Asia. It's roughly 100 times smaller in terms of landmass than compared to Ireland, but we have more people. And so you might be genuinely, legitimately concerned about things like the price of housing if you were to emigrate, or you might be concerned with traffic, for instance. So the very first point I have to make today, if you forget everything else, is that despite Singapore's small size, despite our lack of space, there's enough room for you to have sex. That's right, there's enough room for you to have sex. And don't just take my word for it. This is what our former senior minister of state, and she's still in cabinet, she said, essentially she said, you need only a very small space to have sex. So now that I'm sure we can all heave a sigh of relief, you might have some concerns. How will the guidelines, the COVID-19 guidelines, potentially disrupt my plans to visit my beau, or to have someone special over? And no worries there, because I've done my homework and I've checked. Yes, indeed, households may also receive 5 visitors. And unlike in level 3 in Ireland, and we nearly went to level 5, these visitors can be from different households. But of course, let me just make this very clear. It would be, immensely irresponsible for me to suggest that you need not postpone your plans, at least until the end of the pandemic, to organize multi-household orgies. I simply cannot condone this. I simply cannot. Anyway, enough of the negatives. Let's talk about the economy. Singapore has a great economy. It's a developed economy, many thriving sectors and industries. It's a financial hub for the region, and very similar to Ireland, you might find this to be common. There are these big tech companies that set up, their regional headquarters in Singapore. But if you're not enamored by the world of high finance, or you're slightly distrustful of big tech companies, let me direct your attention to a third money-making scheme, and that is making babies. Yes, that's right. The Singapore government is going to give you cold, hard cash for making babies. And I can already see, some of you, look slightly doubtful about the financial viability of such a scheme. So let me turn your attention to the numbers. According to the World Bank data, within a recent 10-year period, Singapore's GDP has doubled in size. So it's doubled, yeah, within a 10-year period. Within that same 10-year period, the amount that you would receive for having a baby didn't just multiply by 2 times or 3 times, but by 7 times. It multiplied by 7 times within the same period. But enough of this talk. After all, the HIST is not really the kind of society that would begin its chamber debating season with, euphemistic expressions like love in a time of COVID. Let's turn our attention instead to the arts and culture, nourishment for the soul. And to my Irish friends here, I'm not referring to a Guinness. I happen to live next to the Guinness factory. But what I am really referring to is, the works of, Irish artists like Seamus Heaney and William Butler Yeats. There are many great artists in this country, but hear me out here. I suggest that immigrating to a different country would bring in a breath of fresh air, new ideas for the artistic endeavors of the HIST. Bear with me as I make this cliche, reference to normal people, but imagine the artistic potential, the creative possibilities of Connell lying on a tropical sandy beach, palm trees, waving in the breeze. And needless to say, in Singapore, it's far too hot and humid for him to have his shirt on. He reaches for his chest, and when he reaches his neck, he says, "Oh no, my metal chain is missing. What are we gonna do?" And so we quickly fast forward to the next scene where we find Connell and Marianne, in the middle of Singapore's busiest, most bustling shopping district. They are there to buy the new metal chain, of course. And Marianne standing in this junction, flanked by shopping mall after shopping mall, glass and steel, gold and marble monuments to the capitalist gods, finds within herself an inner struggle between her Marxist ideals and the allure of capitalism. Later, we find Connell and Marianne on the deck of an infinity pool overlooking the city skyline. She confides in him about her inner struggle. And, he reassures her by saying, yes, indeed, everything seems rather corrupt and sexy. And so within this very brief time, I hope I've done enough to cover 3 broad areas, and that is sex, money, and I'm so sorry. What I really meant was a geography, economics, and culture. And I hope it's given you some things to think about in making a decision to emigrate. I think that's about it.
Thank you very much, Elias. And I would now like to call Tate Donnelly to oppose the motion. Tate.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure how to follow that.
I wondered.
I don't really know where to start, and mine's a bit somber, to be honest, a bit serious. So thanks for the laugh, but I'm going to bring you all down now. So yeah, I suppose just first of all, thanks very much to the College Historical Society for the invite to speak, and I've been looking forward to it all week. Yeah, I'm also going to deviate from my usual self as a young person in politics and someone who's run for election. My one trick, the one thing I can do is give out of it the government, so you're asking me now to oppose emigrating means I actually have to talk about good things. And everybody knows that somebody shouting on the sidelines in politics isn't very good at that. So it's a new experience for me. So yeah, I suppose I'm sorry to depress you all, but I think that first of all, I'm going to speak in an Irish context, and I'm going to speak in an Irish context because I'm imagining us in the GMB on the front square of Trinity. So at that stage, we would all be in Ireland. So if anybody's not, just pretend you are. And also, if anybody heard Matthew's brilliant contribution in opposition, well, you didn't, because I'm going to say some of the same points, so you didn't hear that already. So yeah, I suppose the main thing, I'm going to try and avoid going into all the great things about Ireland and our economy and our everything like that. I am going to say this though, that we are all students in, if you heard Matthew's speech, no you didn't. I am going to say though that we are all students in Trinity, and that my arguments against emigrating do not stand for those who are in other situations. At the end of the day, the motion is this house would emigrate. So obviously there are people in other situations across Ireland who have much more reason to emigrate, we'll say, for employment. But at the end of the day, Trinity College is the most employable institution in Ireland, according to the QS rankings. And as a college, it's 48th in employment rate in the world. So let's be very realistic here about our own privilege in that sense. So given that, and given that there are other people in Ireland in different circumstances, I suppose what I do have to mention is our level of privilege. Ireland is, although I would disagree with how it's done through multinational corporations and the like, and through quite climate damaging ways, Ireland is one of the richest countries in the world. Now it's not evenly spread, but we are at this stage in the most employable institute in Ireland and the top college in Ireland, and we find ourselves in this privileged situation. So who are we out of that privilege to decide all of a sudden, oh, I might just emigrate, it might be even better there? At the end of the day, we won a lottery really, to be sitting here in Trinity College on a Wednesday evening debating this in an intellectual sense. I'm sorry, the speech isn't very funny really, it's actually quite a bit mean, so sorry about that. I'm going to bring that into the climate context as well, because we obviously know the challenges of climate change, but Ireland's climate, first of all, where do you find such a moderate climate with such a beautiful country, a country where you can be quite self-reliant really. We can be self-reliant for energy. We do have enough wind and solar and stuff like that. We can be self-reliant for food. Look at Ireland, it's a food producer. Look at how big farming is as an industry in Ireland. And so where do you find such a climate like that, so moderate, very livable all year round? Let's not forget all of those countries around the world where the same can't be said. But I suppose on top of that, then our duties towards climate change, and I suppose just to put that into context, if you were to, we heard the first speaker talk about dabbling in a bit of this. I might just travel to Asia. I might try this culture over here. Just to put this into perspective here, if I was to fly back and forth to India, for example, right, my one share of those emissions on that flight would be something around 4,200 kilograms of carbon. Just to put that into context, the average Indian person emits something around 2,000 or less, actually, about 1,800 tons of carbon per year per capita. So let's just not forget our privileged position here. Oh, I might just try this culture, because realistically, that is the wrong thing to do, the morally wrong thing to do. In fact, in Ireland, we emit 13.2 tons of carbon per person per year, which was the case in 2018. We have benefited from, when you look at other countries now that are going to be exposed to things like climate refugees, there's all sorts of estimate, and it's almost impossible to model how many climate refugees there will be, but it's going to be at least hundreds of millions over the next coming 20 to 30 years. And when you take into account that we are the ones actually causing that, whether we like it or not, we are the ones actually causing that. Now here we are at one of the brightest institutions, probably possibly the best institution in the country, debating this as we actively cause this damage as a country, and here we are in this position to use our abilities and the privileged position we've been given to turn that around, and how just morally wrong in so many ways it would be to decide, actually I want something a little bit better. We have really hit the lucky note in many ways, and I hate saying that, because I also hate lots of things about the government and how they divvy out what we'll call our successes as a country. But I think one of the huge things I will say, and it's a very valid point, is housing. that we will suffer from an extremely high cost of housing or rent. But we have an absolutely untapped potential in rural Ireland. I think sometimes we forget that. In rural Ireland, we have an absolutely incredible standard of living. The beauty, the relative wealth compared to the rest of the country, the ability to be self-sufficient in things like energy and food, and the employability if the national broadband plan is implemented. So let's not actually forget that we have that, and how the housing becomes a bit less of an issue then, and the cost of housing. There are serious issues, of course, around the country in things like mental health. In transport, public transport is a massive thing. But we really must all gather together, accept the damage we have done to the climate. I'm going to put this in another context to try and help get it across. The IPCC report, of course, said according to 2018, we would have to reduce our emissions by roughly 48%, or roughly half by 2030, and then be carbon neutral by 2050 in order to avoid 1.5 degrees global warming, which is what they would consider catastrophic, right? So to avoid that they were the amount we would have to hit. However, that doesn't take into account what we'll say is your global contribution in the first place, or a global justice element. So, for example, how much we emit, as I said, 13.2 tons per capita per person in Ireland per year. And when you take into account then other countries across the world where that's an absolute fraction of that is their emissions, it's not fair for them to ask them to reduce their emissions by as much as us. So that's the concept. There's an equity framework, more or less, to try to calculate your global contribution and this is the bit that's going to depress you now, and you're not going to like it. Taking the most severe, what we'll call, account of global contribution and the global justice element of this, and to avoid 1.5 degrees global warming, it reckons Ireland would have to be climate neutral by, wait for it, 2024. 2024. So there's one for you all to go home and cry yourself to sleep about. We are in this position whether we like it or not. It's horrible. Sorry, but sorry again. But we all own this, and we are all compared to other people in Ireland. Look at us here sitting. Luckily, we're already at home. Yeah, everybody's probably crying. Sorry. Actually, let's just disband this debate and let's just go and cry. But no. We all have a huge part to play in this, and that's going to involve absolutely transforming Ireland's energy system, Ireland's transport system. It's going to involve a lot of support in mental health and psychological support. It's going to involve transforming Ireland's agriculture as well. It's going to be an absolutely huge task, and unfortunately we do not have time to dabble in a bit of this or a bit of that. We do not have time to travel to Australia or America just for the crack to see how we like it for a few years, see if it's any better than it is here. We have an amazing country from top to bottom, from Donegal down to Cork, and it has absolutely untapped potential in mitigating this climate crisis. And also, if anyone's a football fan, Kenny's at the wheel. Why the hell would you leave Ireland when we have exciting young talent coming through? Anyone watching the Ireland under-21s at the minute knows that. Tune into Ireland Slovakia tomorrow night to see it. That's my joke. It's probably terrible compared to the rest of you, but there we are. Thanks a million.
Thank you very much, Tate. And I would now like to call Alva Noonan to speak for the motion. Alva.
Just before Alva speaks, I'd like to just announce that we were having 2 floor speeches tonight. In proposition, we'll have Oliver Fisk, and in opposition, we'll have Jack Williams. So thanks so much for standing up and giving a speech at the end of all of these wonderful speeches. Alva?
Okay, can you hear me? Am I good to go?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'll just start my timer. Okay, so I kind of want to focus a little bit on something else. This is going to be an interesting follow-up to the previous speech, considering we just heard a lot of points about why we are in a very privileged position, and I certainly don't dispute that. We definitely are. The fact that we can travel around a lot is fantastic. Well, not at the moment, obviously, but in general, the fact that we have been able to travel around and to be exposed to all these different languages and be in a situation where we can afford to do that is great. So I'm going to take into consideration that privilege and talk about us from that privileged position. In terms of emigration, for those of you who don't know, my dad was a diplomat up until last year. So I kind of had a childhood of what one might call either emigration or moving around, depending on how you want to put it. So I kind of have a lot of experience with this, funnily enough. And I definitely think, in terms of me personally, it's given me a lot of perspective on a lot of things, including the various ways in which I am privileged myself. For instance, when I lived in Egypt, education was something I saw that was really important, and that stayed with me even when I was 9 years old. So I would actually say that the ability to emigrate and to travel to new countries and to really throw yourself into those cultures is a great way of seeing how you yourself are privileged and how you yourself come from that privileged position, and maybe even what you can do to support others and to give back to communities who aren't in such a privileged position. I know that can border on sort of a savior complex, but in terms of giving back to a community, even those at home who can't afford to travel or who've never traveled outside the country for one reason or another, or who are living in poor situations, I feel like going abroad is a great way of sort of understanding maybe what they're going through. And you might even be able to just reach out to someone of a different culture who has immigrated into Ireland because of your experience living abroad, or because of that touchstone that you have from having lived in their country. Like there are a few times where I've been able to say, oh, I visited this place, or I lived in this place. So I kind of, I have somewhat of an understanding of what you're going through. It really does bring people together, I find. Not just in terms of privilege, but also in terms of coming together as people. I think travel is a great way of giving you another perspective from another culture. And so when you can say that you've lived somewhere, or you've visited somewhere, for an extended period of time, or you've studied somewhere on Erasmus, you kind of throw yourself into those culture. And so it gives you, when you come back, it gives you kind of an increased capacity for critical thinking in terms of, well, how am I looking at this lens? What cultural practices are there that might be different? What are things that we have that are similar? And you kind of understand how to spot the various things that have been adopted, or how to spot something that might make someone feel uncomfortable, or how to spot when something hasn't been appreciated as much as it could be. And I think one of the prime examples for this is the IB program, the International Baccalaureate program. And there's a reason that it's so internationally diverse, and it tailors to so many different histories and so many different cultures and so many different ways in which you can practice them. Like the curriculum is kind of set out, but I remember in Romania, we learned about traditional Romanian housing. We went to the Cultural Heritage Museum. We learned about the poor rural communities, and we learned how building houses might help communities impacted by floods, or might help communities impacted by storms. And so I think there is a reason why it's worth living abroad, and it's worth going abroad and being immersed in terms of understanding what different issues impact other cultures. Secondly, and just to kind of round out my speech, I want to talk a little bit about language benefits and linguistic benefits, and how if you're studying a language, or if you have any appreciation for foreign culture, living abroad for any amount of time is a great thing to do, both because it allows you to sort of see the world as it's written, and see that culture and country as it's written on paper, or shown on a movie, or in TV shows and pictures. And it gives you a better appreciation of what that place is actually like. And so there's a massive difference. There's nothing that can really compensate for living somewhere during a time of celebration, or living somewhere, living through a massive world event through somewhere. Like I lived through the Arab Spring in 2011 in Egypt, and there is nothing that could possibly replace that experience in terms of understanding the massive cultural paradigm shift that happened, and that allowed for that to kind of happen and come together. And I think that also, the same logic also applies to language. And so even if you're going on an Erasmus program, like there's a reason why for modern language programs and programs with a modern language involved, there's a mandatory at least semester, preferably year abroad, because not only does that boost your language competency and allows you to kind of become fluent in the language, interact with the street culture, with the slang that you may not have heard of before, that you may not have learned from the textbooks. It also allows you to kind of engage with the people and gain sort of a better appreciation for the flow of the language. Having a second or third or even fourth language, I've known lots of multilingual people in my time, is an amazing skill to have that's going to open up a lot more employment opportunities for you, especially if you go abroad. And I know there are some great companies in Ireland, but if you're someone who's looking to study a language and to go abroad, or even to become a translator or to contribute to, say, big tech industries, learning a language and traveling abroad and going to that country and living there for a long time is really going to help you. There's like traveling for job opportunities and traveling for better work opportunities is another frequent reason why people emigrate anyway, especially if there's language involved, but not exclusively. Learning a language is also just much easier if you can immerse yourself into that culture, if you can pick up on the little subtle linguistic differences that they have. Maybe there's a word for a specific concept in that culture that isn't in your own, or vice versa. Maybe that culture doesn't have a word or doesn't have a specific phrase for something that you've experienced. And I think those little differences, they're going to broaden your worldview. They're going to help you become multilingual, which is an amazing skill and a really, really core one to have in this kind of interconnected world. And it's going to give you a sense of your own privilege and your own position and how you can give back as a person of privilege to someone else. So I beg you to propose the motion.
All right. Thank you very much, Alva. And I'd now like to call Ben Mahan to oppose the motion. Ben.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes. You're muted.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Right. So I'm going to start. Right. So the core of my speech is I perceive immigration to be action.
Hold on. Your sound is not great. Try again.
Is that fine?
This is something we don't normally have in chamber.
Possibly if you switched off the video, it might give you a bit more bandwidth. No, that's no better.
Well, with a brief intermission while Ben Mahan changes device.
Do you want to take one of the floor speakers while you're waiting for Ben to come back? Or we'll give maybe back on the phone in a minute.
Yeah, we'll give Ben a moment. If anyone has any hot takes on the motion, you can give them now via the chat and we'll discuss.
I particularly enjoy how this has been a motion that has been debated throughout the HIS's history.
Yeah, I like
this.
Topical.
Ben, you're back.
Hello. Yeah, if anything, this kind of changes the point about how good rural Ireland is because the Wi-Fi is awful. But anyway.
Well,
right.
Over
much
to
better
you.
connection.
Much better.
Yeah. Perfect. Right. I'll give my speech then. So I don't have a timer, so maybe someone let me know. But yeah, right. So I think the core of my speech is about how we perceive emigration to be and our ideal and where that comes from compared to the reality of what it is, which is just kind of an arts box smart way of saying that I think we think emigration is better than it actually is. So if we look across the rest of the world, we actually are in a really privileged position, as has already been said, but I think it's hard to recognize the amount of privilege that we have. So I think the first one that's already been briefly mentioned is food. It's very easy to give out about Ireland, but we don't realize just how important access to food is and how many people around the world don't have access to this. And I think that if you don't have access to food, nothing else matters. If you don't have access to clean water, nothing else matters. And it's something we just take for granted. My second point is that instead of saying that I'm gay from now on, I'm just going to say that I, for fun, do activities that would lead me to be executed in over a dozen countries and imprisoned in dozens more, because that sounds way cooler, and it is unfortunately true. So that knocks a whole other load of countries off the list of possible emigration ones. And thirdly, I can't speak from experience, but I think it's fair enough to assume for any women in the room in the Zoom call, that being able to drive, not being forced into a marriage, and not being owned by your husband are like desirable things. So again, like that's something we take for granted in Ireland, but around the world, a lot of countries don't. And then next is the political system. And as much as you can give out about Irish politics, at least we have a relatively stable government that transfers power, and we don't have to be too worried about kind of things like government tyranny that a lot of countries do. And finally, scary, horrific, painful deaths. I'm not about them. So there was a spider in my room last week. If I have my video, I'll show you exactly where it is. And it was above my bed, and I couldn't move it because I'm fuck scared of spiders, and I had to sleep in the spare bedroom, much to my like shame. But I still kind of stand by it, and I definitely wouldn't sleep in a room with a spider again because I'm just really scared. And the next one is natural disasters. Like our most famous like incident with like a natural disaster is a news report where someone says don't take unnecessary journeys, and where around the world other people have hundreds of thousands of deaths. So I think again we don't recognize our privilege, we just kind of don't have that. And then finally, serious war or threat of serious war. I think it's fair enough to say that we don't want to move anywhere that has a threat of serious war, which unfortunately Taiwan has been doing so well so far, knock them all out of the park. Now we can't go to Taiwan. Sorry, the HIST is now banned in China because I said Taiwan. But anyway, so I think this kind of says that like Laura was talking about like finding a different way of living and nuance and culture, but essentially with like these basic factors, unfortunately, the vast majority of the rest of the world doesn't have this privilege. All that's really left is like Western Europe, maybe some parts of like the developed parts of Asia, but most of the world doesn't have the same level of privilege as we do that we take for granted. And I think it's very easy to go on about like kind of cultural enhancement from a position of privilege, but when you actually go to these countries and you can't actually have any of your basic needs met, it just kind of ruins the whole point. So then onto the emigration adventure trope. So there's this like trope in movies, which is like found everywhere from like classic literature to Disney movies to niche cinema, which sounds like a porn reference, but it's not. It's just like art house cinema. In this trope, the main character grows up in like a backwater and then like moves to the big city, and like then there's probably a musical number, and then meets someone, gets married, has like a solvable conflict that they surmount, and then everyone lives happily ever after. But like, don't underestimate the power of media. This is a trope that we like see everywhere, from like Star Wars to Tangled to Enchanted. That kind of becomes part of our psyche. But it's not actually a true like ideal. Because we have to start in a bad place. I think we've already established that Ireland isn't a bad place. Like maybe 30 years ago, it was, but now it isn't. Like Ireland isn't the shitty backwater that it used to be. Up until very recently. And the second one is that the bright lights actually have to be a desirable outcome. The grass isn't always green on the other side. As I've already established, you have fairly limited like access of places to go. And you also don't have Prince Charming there normally, which is kind of sad and unfortunate. But anyway, and a more realistic image is probably living in a shoebox apartment somewhere. Like if you think rent in Dublin is bad, try London, Paris, or New York. And even if all goes well, which is less likely, when you leave Ireland, you end up with like, you don't have the same support groups that you have in Ireland. So I think things like family are generally underestimated. And oh, there's a POI. Oh, okay, quite colonialist take. Yeah, I thought about this and I was worried about like this. And I think that I don't think it's like a colonialist take. I think it's more that we have so much privilege that we just kind of forget about, or like don't acknowledge just how important that privilege is. And if we move elsewhere in the world, we just assume that we'll have that privilege, but the locals there at least do not have that privilege that we do. And also the other POI about Dublin being the worst value for money in the world, I won't take, because I would definitely think that like London or Paris or that, you get less for your money. But anyway, on to family. Like, as you become older, family becomes more important. Now, I do sound like a 70-year-old woman here, also like banging on about the importance of family and like coming to communions and stuff. But I think if anything, COVID shows us more. Like, family is really important, and so are close friend networks. And as soon as you leave your country of origin, generally, no, this doesn't just apply to Ireland. This applies generally, pretty much. You lose that kind of friend group, and that's very important. Like, I think there's a lot to be said for the friends you make in childhood and like as a teenager. Like, there's something about being forced to stay in school together or stay in college together for 4 years, and like, call it shared bonding or shared pain. It is still an irreplaceable experience that you don't get if you go abroad. And I think there's something about making friends as an adult that a lot of people kind of underestimate, and that, like, if you speak to older people, they tend to say after a certain age, you just don't make new friends like you used to, and you only connect with your family. And I think that makes it all the more important to stay connected with your family and friends. And that's one reason why you shouldn't emigrate. Overall, I think you shouldn't emigrate because the rest of the world, we tend to underestimate how privileged we are, and also that we tend to have a rose-tinted view of the rest of the world and of emigration in general. So that's why I beg you to oppose.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, will Maggie or Breed, the auditor or the correspondence secretary, introduce the speakers from the floor?
Yeah, I'll introduce the speakers from the floor. In our proposition, we have Oliver Fisk. Then we also have me doing a floor speech because I can't wait. And then in opposition, sorry, did I say proposition or opposition? In proposition, we have Oliver Fisk and myself. In opposition, we have Jack Williams and Christoph Hoke. I'm probably mispronouncing your surname. Apologies. So floor speech will be 4 minutes in length. Oliver.
Right, Oliver.
Hang on. Sorry, have I added the right people?
Oh, it says Oliver, but he's muted.
We're good. They're all here. We're good.
I wasn't sure if the camera was going to turn on, but I'm happy to go cameraless. In fact, I'd actually prefer that because I'm wearing a Christmas jumper.
Oliver, you're a bit quiet.
Is it better? Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, yeah, I wasn't sure if the camera would pop on. But I'm happy to go cameraless because I'm wearing a Christmas sweater. Okay, so I'll start then. Hello, everyone. My name's Oliver Fisk. I'm a second year. If you frequent the HIST as much as I do, you might recognize my voice from the comedy debate last week, during which I aimed for humor and jest, but this time the motion's different, times have changed, and I'm going to change along with them and be more serious. You may or may not be able to tell that I grew up in America, but I grew up in America after my parents moved from Belfast when I was young. So I am speaking to you as an emigrant from Ireland who moved to the United States and then who moved back to Ireland for college, just to make the circle go round. But I say that I think that's relevant because if there's someone in the debate who knows what it's like to emigrate and then come back, and so I've been to the other side, I've left the house, I've gone onto the world, and I can tell you about it. I think it is worth emigrating from Ireland. And the first point is sorts of it has to do with technology, and it has to do with the digital world. It has to do with what life is like when we use our devices, we use our laptops, we use our computers. And that is very similar in that it is essentially a carbon digital copy, no matter where you are in the world. When you access your social medias, when you go on Facebook in the US, it's the same thing as when you go on Facebook in Ireland. When you use Zoom, it's the same as it is wherever you are in the world. You will always be able to draw on your connections, your friends. You'll be able to access the same content, relatively speaking. Of course, I'm referring to places where you have connection to the internet. That will all be the same. So if that is the case, which I believe it is, it's necessary to turn away from the digital world, turn to the physical world, turn to geography, to nature, to sights and sounds and scenery. Of course, Ireland is well versed for being a beautiful country, but I would propose to you that I would rather live in a country where taking a drive across the country doesn't take, or takes more than 3 hours. I'd rather live in a country where there's different climates and different environments, different forms of nature, where the scenery is not just a sort of similar views depending sort of to go around the country. I'd rather live in a country where there's something to explore, and it takes longer to explore. And I think, with respect to the great nation of Ireland and the island of Ireland, just your boundaries are somewhat limited when you live here. I also think that, considering the scope of life and how generally limited and short it is, I think it's important that you expand your horizons as much as possible. I don't think the world and the globe can fit on an island. I don't think it can fit into Ireland. I don't think Dublin is, being the biggest city in Ireland, I don't think it is the pinnacle of world culture and education. I don't think we can say that staying in Ireland really gives us a truly worthy lived experience. I think it's necessary to go farther and to look further far afield than you would if you lived in Ireland for your whole life. And at this point, I think it's important to respond to what Ben was saying about sort of expanding your horizons being a trope, because it's not a trope. It's not a trope because 80 million people around the world, the sons and daughters of the Irish brothers and sisters of the world, disagree, because they they took it upon themselves throughout history to look further far afield, and to seek greener pastures, and found them. And that's what my family did, and here I am back telling you about it. So, but it's valid, and to say that simply leaving the country is a trope isn't true. Variety is the spice of life. It's what gives it all its flavor. But also I want to talk more practically, because aside from those broader, grander notions, I think if you want to secure a future for yourself, you should look beyond Ireland. It was well noted that Ireland has a fantastic educational system, but what happens when everyone receives a university degree? There are only so many jobs for bachelor degree holding candidates on this nation. To secure a stable financial future, it is worth looking abroad. And I listened to the thoughts of responsibility and of duty to the nation, especially in regards to climate change. But I would argue that climate change is an international problem, and that remaining in one nation to solve one nation's problems doesn't necessarily guarantee a stable and secure future. I think responsibility is international. It goes beyond borders. And that you can be responsible and be a fighter in the war against climate change and against the destruction of the environment, no matter where you live. That is the reason why I've tried to volunteer to help with climate activism since I arrived in Ireland. I did the same in the United States. It wasn't limited or circumscribed to where I was living. And as Ben was talking about privilege, I think he painted a rather poor picture of what the rest of the world looks like. I think there are plenty of places where you can have access to the things he said, namely many places in Europe, many places in Africa, North America, South America. The world is not as black and white as he made it out to be, I would say. But really, I think I'd like to finish with just a question. When you look at Ireland and you look at the country and the cities they're in, when you look at Dublin and the people in it, if you look at all of that and think, this is enough for me, this is all that I need to see, all I need to experience, then immigration may not be for you. But I would call upon those of you who want to explore more and see more, and take in a broader view of the world and of life and of culture and of society and of language, And to those people, I would say that the best thing to do is to emigrate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to call on Jack Williams to oppose the motion.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Give me a second.
Quick reminder, guys, the floor speeches are 4 minutes.
Yeah, don't worry. I can time myself.
Good reminder.
Myself as well, so all is good. 3, 2, 1. In 1922, when we escaped British tyranny, in the 1940s, when we survived the World War as a neutral country, in 1957, when we joined the European Economic Community and were finally able to establish ourselves as an economic actor on the world stage, when we legalized gay marriage in 2015, these are things that Irish people did together. It would have been easier in the 50s and in the 40s to immigrate to Australia, to the UK, or to the US. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people did do this, but I think a lot of the things that we achieved were slowed down as a result of it. So when Oliver talks about accessing money or wealth, I think beyond a certain point where maybe there is too many degrees within a country, I think that you still have a duty to help those people who maybe don't have the wealth that you have accessing within that country and helping them realize their potential and hopefully redistributing those very skills that you acquired through that state. Or it's preparing for the next crisis, as Tate outlines, whether it's climate change, or maybe it's helping your country survive a pandemic rather than going to a country that may be healthier and may not be locked down. But look, I think I'd posit to you that you have a moral duty to that state, especially a state that necessarily has afforded you so much privilege, a state that is giving you education, healthcare, opportunities to express yourself. And I know that people will view this as, oh, it's entirely random that you were born in Ireland rather than in any other country in the world. And as Tate points out, correctly so, it is a position of privilege that you are afforded, but maybe it is random where you're born. But I don't think that's necessarily matters, right? Because here's some intuition. If I have a child, it is morally random and arbitrary that that child, rather than any other child, was my child, right? Out of all the atoms, right, out of all the cells that may have happened, it is entirely arbitrary that that is my child. It doesn't flow from that I do not have a moral duty to that child in the same way that I do not have a moral duty to that state. So when individuals choose to leave a state that has afforded them privilege, right? And I understand there are some people who may have to leave Ireland or other countries to emigrate because they've literally no other choice. But when I think you do have a choice, when I think there is some ability for you to make that choice, then you should always choose to not immigrate, that you should choose to help and to stay in the very nation that gave you all of the privilege that you have afforded, to help those very people who are not afforded that same access. And for all of those reasons, I think you should not emigrate and you should stay in Ireland and enable those things to be done. Oppose.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker for the motion is Breed O'Donnell.
Cool. Hi, guys. So if there's one thing that is like a core component of my identity, of my personality, I have for the last 2 years have not been able to scrub it out of my system. It's how everyone views me in the society. It's awful. It's that I'm a young professional. I know it's such a filthy word. I kind of hate saying it, but it's who I am and you have to accept that. At my core, I'm motivated largely by self-interest. Most of the time, my interests align with, what is good for the world. I don't want climate change to ruin my retirement plans. So yeah, I agree a lot with what Tate says and everything like that. However, for what I want to do in the world, I want to go into the corporate world. Go into the corporate world, and I want to rise up, and I want to be in a position of power where it can actually affect change, where it can affect change in ways of making sure we're doing sustainable climate change, or finding new ideas from abroad, or even just in general helping other people in Ireland build themselves up. And I hate to say it, but the only way for me to do that is in fact going abroad. It's a shitty factor of Irish corporate life that if you stay in Ireland and you go in at the graduate level and you slowly try and build your way up, you will not actually get that high. What you need to do is go abroad. You need to get the experience abroad for rather like silly reasons, but it is just reasons like you get experience other cultures, you get experience the high lives of, say, London or New York or Paris, and you understand different types of people and how to interact with them, and you get their ideas. And then largely just through that experience, you can build yourself up and then come back to Ireland. That's my plan. I'm going to emigrate. I hate to say it, but it's my plan. I'll probably move to the US, hopefully not the UK. I can't speak other languages, so sadly the rest of Europe and the rest of the world is out of bounds for me. But for me, I'm really excited for it. And I think there are multiple reasons why I'm excited for it. Not only will I be gaining experience and then be able to bring that experience back to Ireland and help build Ireland back up with new ideas, with just general, like, just change of cultures. My plan, I'm just so excited to go abroad and see tall buildings. I fully believe that Dublin as like a city is crap. Ireland is great. Dublin has unique quirks, but overall, is it actually that great to live in? Our Wi-Fi is crap. Our buildings are small. Our housing is expensive. I want to move abroad and experience some different things. And then what I also want to do abroad is represent Ireland. I think this is something that's kind of been overlooked, but throughout this debate, emigrating means that you're representing Ireland and speaking about Ireland to people abroad. That actually helps raise Ireland up, both from getting business to Ireland, but also just generally improving the reputation of Ireland. There's that classic note of Ireland being like filled with wonderful, welcoming people. And that's because people go abroad and they represent Ireland really, really well. I cannot wait to be someone in the US, the Irish person in a workplace where everyone points to and is like, oh yeah, she's class, she's good crack. Or actually they don't say crack, I suppose. But like, I cannot wait for that to happen. And I can't wait to rise up in the world and represent Ireland on the world stage in whatever field I decide to end up in. It's still up in the air at this point why I'm taking a year out. But yeah, essentially, I can't wait to emigrate. I can't wait to represent Ireland abroad. I can't wait to experience new things. And I can't wait to be a filthy, dirty, young professional. So for all those reasons, please propose this motion.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Christoph Huck to oppose the motion.
Okay, cool. Is my sound working?
Yes, very good.
Awesome, cool. So as you can probably tell by my accent, I am not from Ireland. I'm originally from South Africa, which I think, you know, I've emigrated to Ireland, and yet I'm still going to oppose the motion. It gives me a unique perspective on that I've seen a lot of Irish people miss out. Wait, that sentence didn't quite work, did it? But basically, I feel that coming from outside Ireland, you see a lot of things within Ireland that the Irish people don't necessarily value. For example, safety, you know, emigration, and by the way, I'm dealing with emigration purely from an Irish perspective and not a, you know, from an outside of Ireland perspective. So South Africa, for example, Cape Town, one of the main cities in South Africa, is the 8th most homicidal city on planet Earth. It's a very dangerous place. You know, it's not safe to walk around in the middle of the day, kind of thing. So it's a very dangerous place to live. And coming to Ireland, you know, there's such a freedom of being able to just walk around with friends and not have to worry about being bludgeoned over the head by somebody. That is always nice. And so, so basically, you know, that's one thing that is already, you know, puts Ireland on the top of a lot of lists. Ireland has a large history component that you won't find in other places, again, comparing it to South Africa. South Africa is a relatively new country, so is America and Australia and all of these other places that people tend to emigrate to. And you do miss not seeing these like ancient, you know, bastions of an older era. I mean, you know, the Dublin Castle here in Dublin. I lived in Kilkenny for 4 years. I went to CBS Kilkenny, which was obviously quite a culture shock. But you know, there's Kilkenny Castle, there's like all these Norman towers. I mean, it's incredible just to look at that and see just the history of the country and the people that have stayed in this country and that have developed it over thousands of years. I mean, you know, it's like Ireland did not get to where it is purely just on like luck. I mean, there's such, you know, an ancestry and history of people that have actually stuck it through and that haven't said, oh, we're off to, you know, England or France or wherever, to just leave the whole endeavor entirely. So yeah, there's that. Then I feel that a lot of Ireland's problems probably do stem from just this cultural almost obsession with leaving the country. The amount of people that I've met throughout my scholastic career so far who have generally described Ireland as terrible and, you know, as having no prospects, and I understand Celtic Tiger and all of that. It has had a bad history, but economically, but, you know, Ireland tends to take a very Dublin-centric perspective. I think if it invested more into places like Kilkenny or Waterford or Galway or any of those places, you would see that the country would thrive marvelously. So ultimately, I feel that it does need people, or Cork, yeah, exactly. It does need people to stay and say, you know what, we are going to fix our country and we're going to make it a really cool place. You know, like, I mean, people potentially might want to come to Ireland like I did. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff like that too that people forget. And I think that's about all I have to say. Yeah, cool.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I think my role is now to put the question to the House. On the motion, this House would emigrate. All those in favour, please signal aye. And all those against, please signal nay. And does somebody count them?
Yes, we've got a Zoom poll here,
Yeah.
which unfortunately panelists cannot vote in. I'm not sure why that is, but I think we'll just assume that everyone's on the side that they spoke for.
Technically, you know, well, treasurer, say, timekeeping doesn't get, or yourself doesn't get a vote, which is very unfair because you guys haven't spoken on anything.
This is true. This is one of those technical issues that I think I might have to iron out in subsequent debates. But we could always use the old-fashioned method. If you're a panelist, you just scream. So 3 people haven't voted, I believe, in the poll. I don't know who has voted in the poll, so I don't want to double count you if you've also voted in the chat. And it's important, I think, because the vote is quite close. So if those 3 remaining people would like to vote, I'll give you a few seconds. So, listen, this is where the poll stands. I feel that's probably too close to call, given that we haven't counted any of the panelists. But
well,
too close to call.
All right, I'll take your judgment on that.
Can we have like a battle to the death, and then whoever wins that can just get.
All right. I was told to say the motion is carried or the motion is defeated, but the motion is undecided, I think, for next year's debate. So I think you asked me to say a few words, just a few at the end. I've spent a fair amount of my career actually studying emigration, so it's a topic which I'm particularly interested in. In the 19th century, sort of at its peak, over half the Irish population emigrated because they saw no future, and they went never to come back. It was a sort of the emigrants' wake was sort of something you would never see your family again. And Jack Williams made an interesting point, and some historians say actually a lot of the very bright people are the people with go-ahead went ahead and left, and if they had remained, maybe they might have, Ireland's 19th century history might have been different. It's rather interesting. The opportunity to emigrate may have had an effect on the society. Moving on to the 1950s, I was a child in the 1950s, fortunately no older, because it was a very claustrophobic society. I don't know whether you read, say, Edna O'Brien or any of the literature from the time. We were all Catholic, 90% Catholic, all blood group O, same genes. People emigrated, never came back, censorship, closed to the outside world. And that is why many people left, because it was a society which was stultifying. Fortunately, quite a number of them came back in the 1970s. And then again, you have an economic disaster in the 1980s. And I think it was a debate in the HIST in the late 80s. It was very interesting, same motion, but those proposing the motion gave very different arguments. Their arguments were, I want to cast the dust of Ireland off my heels. There's no future, I'm going away. Whereas both Alva and Laura in your speeches were about the benefits of going away, but very possibly coming back. It wasn't, I want to give up on Ireland. It was that actually seeing the outside world may be beneficial. And the research shows that what happened was a lot of people went to the 1980s, but they turned out to be homing pigeons. They came back. And it is the extent to which returned immigrants changed Irish society and changed the economy. There's important work, say, by the ESRI, a series of papers on returned immigrants, which shows that people who went and came back earned 10% more over their lifetime because they learned a foreign language, learned how to do things differently, and helped transform Irish society. Like coffee shops didn't exist in the 1980s. There were pubs. My avocado pear theory of economic development, you could get them in Dublin, but you couldn't get them on the West Coast. Immigrants came back and said, I want avocado pears. Not that I much go for them myself, but anyway, it is a wider cultural change in Irish society. And I think that today, I mentioned that in the early 19th century, over 50% of the population emigrated, so that 5% of Americans were born in Ireland, 10% of Canadians were born in Ireland, 4% of British were born in Ireland in 1860. 50% go, but the vast bulk come back. And what they bring back to Irish society helps transform it. And it has been added to, of course, by the very substantial immigration. And the immigration into Ireland are culturally diverse. They're better educated on average than Irish people. They bring something different. And the transformation in the economy and in the society has, I think, been, over my lifetime, very important. So this movement of population out, but it's important that they come back and that they bring something with them when they come back. I was asked to speak to the Australian, Tasmanian Prime Minister in 2000 on the Celtic Tiger or whatever. And I gave the standard story, education and FDI and so on. And at the end he said, what role did Irish music play in the Irish success story? And I was stumped, but it wasn't a stupid question, because actually why a lot of young people who are not Irish, why did they come to Ireland? What they find exciting? They found the culture exciting. Christoph found the safety exciting. So that it is actually a society that is attractive both for young Irish people and for foreigners to come is hugely important. We found our way to it, I think, by a mistake. And it's interesting to look at Northern Ireland, where there's huge immigration and in particular graduates, and they don't come back. They don't see it as a society they want to come back to. Northern Ireland has a huge opportunity if it can make itself an attractive society for their children who've emigrated to come back. It could be transformed. So for me, emigration, and I speak as somebody who never emigrated, and my 3 children have emigrated, and my problem is I can't see them, and I'm not going to see them for a year. So there's a downside. Technology makes a difference, but there's nothing like going and visiting them or them coming here. But it is a different society, and I think it has had major benefits. So I'm inclined to the view, yes, emigration is good, but please do come back. And that is, I think, the message. So there was less disagreement between the proposition and the opposition than there would have been 20 or 30 years ago, when people would have said, I want to leave and never come back. Where those who are talking about leaving were ambivalent, sounded as if you might come back. So thank you very much for a fascinating debate. Having heard these debates over decades, that's one of the advantages, disadvantages of being old. You see the change in terms of the arguments which are made, a different Ireland, and I think a better Ireland. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that wonderful chair's address. Really appreciate it, especially makes me feel a lot better about planning to emigrate. I'll definitely come home.
You'll earn 10% more.
Yeah, exactly. I'm motivated by self-interest. So now it's my job to essentially tell everyone about our upcoming events. We have a ton of events happening every single week. If you were interested in this debate and you want to, give it a go, try Zoom debating a go, we encourage you to sign up to our other chamber debates because we have them every single Wednesday night. Next week's chamber debate is This House Would Free the Nipple. The sign-up form is currently on our website, tcdhist.com, and it's all on our term card page. Should be very easy to accessible, and you can check out all our other debates for the term. Also, if you're new to debating and you don't want to do it in front of a whole load of randomers, we encourage you to sign up to Maidens. Maidens is an online competition open to basically freshers, people who've never debated before, or even people who haven't done university debating before. Maybe you did debating in school, you forgot about it, you want to try it again. Maidens is for you. It's held over like 5 weeks. There's rounds every single day, so it will fit into your busy timetable. And it's a really good way to develop your skill and also to meet new people, especially in this time of it being all online. And yeah, so really encourage you to sign up for Maidens. If you have any questions, I'd encourage you to reach out to one of our RecSec, Sean, or Pro RecSecs, Matthew, who has the cool hair, and also Aaron Buckley. Also, if you're a bit nervous about doing Maidens, you might as well come to our novice debate training, which will basically teach you like everything about debating from the ground up, the basics, the ins and outs. That is done by our wonderful DC, Jack Williams. He had like the best debate of the night, so he knows what he's talking about. And yeah, definitely encourage you to check out our novice training. We hold it every Monday night at 6:30 over Zoom. And then finally, we also do schools. The HIS organized Leinster Schools competition, and we really need judges for that. So if you are interested in kind of interacting with kids, giving feedback, building up your skills, listening, and also just judging, which is a really useful skill in debating because it actually shows you how to debate better. I'd encourage you to reach out to Laura Egan. She spoke in this debate. She's our librarian. Reach out to her and talk to her about getting involved in our Leinster Schools judging. And yeah, and then please fill in the oratory returns. They're really useful. Thank you for that. And yeah, usually we have a wine reception after our debates, but unfortunately we can't really do that over Zoom. So rather, we're going to head over to Discord. If you want to join our Discord, I shared into the chat a Linktree link, and essentially there is all our links for the stuff I referenced, signing up to Maidens, but also joining our Discord server. Definitely join, look at all the stuff, follow us on Instagram and on Facebook, join our Facebook group. Loads of ways to get involved and to hear about what we're doing. So yeah, please join us over at the Hiscord after this debate. But I think that's everything for our upcoming events. We do a lot. I'm a bit out of breath. But yeah, with that, I'll hand over to the chair to end the debate.
All right, I call the House adjourned. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much to Professor John Fitzgerald, who again was our excellent chair and who gave an excellent chair's address with some sort of retrospective on times this motion has been debated before, and to our guest Tate Donnelly, who gave a wonderfully depressing but realistic speech, and to all of our speakers, especially our floor speakers. thanks everyone so much for coming and join us on the Hist Court. Bye.
Bye.